The crystal wine glass slipped from my fingers as their laughter crescendoed around me, sharp and merciless as broken glass. They thought they knew me, David Rodriguez, the quiet software analyst with the pronounced limp, the one who took elevators alone while they sprinted up staircases in their Italian leather and designer suits. They saw limitation where I had cultivated strategic advantage, weakness where I had forged an unbreakable weapon. But tonight, as I watched their faces twist with manufactured pity and barely contained mockery, I felt the final piece of my 4-year plan click into place. The careful facade I had maintained at Sterling Investment was about to shatter, and what emerged from the wreckage would redefine everything they believed about power, intelligence, and the fatal cost of underestimating someone. The Rolls-Royce idling outside was merely the opening move in a game they didn't even know they were losing. The Sterling Investment Annual Gala transformed the Meridian Hotel's grand ballroom into a temple of corporate excess. Venetian crystal chandeliers scattered prismatic light across polished marble, while ice sculptures depicting bulls and bears slowly melted into abstract metaphors for market volatility. Servers in crisp uniforms navigated between clusters of executives carrying champagne that cost more per bottle than most families spent on groceries in a month. I occupied my customary position near the mahogany bar, cradling a single glass of wine while studying the predictable social dynamics unfolding before me. The managing directors commanded the room's gravitational center like financial suns, surrounded by orbiting planets of ambitious vice presidents and eager analysts. The support staff, HR coordinators, IT specialists, and administrative personnel maintained respectful distances along the periphery, their presence acknowledged but not celebrated. And then there was me, existing in that peculiar space between visibility and invisibility that my cerebral palsy had carved out over 4 years at Sterling Investment. My condition manifested in ways both subtle and pronounced: the deliberate drag of my left foot, the occasional involuntary tremor in my right hand, the extra beat I required to formulate responses during high-pressure client calls. These had become my defining characteristics in the corporate ecosystem, not my dual degrees from Stanford in computer science and mathematics, not my uncanny ability to identify algorithmic vulnerabilities that others missed, not my flawless record of system optimizations that had saved the company millions in processing costs. Just the disability that made them uncomfortable enough to render me effectively invisible. That invisibility had become my most valuable asset. Executive Vice President Sarah Martinez approached with predatory grace, her smile as calculated as her quarterly performance metrics. She had climbed Sterling's hierarchy by perfecting the art of progressive rhetoric while maintaining the ruthless pragmatism that corporate advancement demanded. "David, you look absolutely wonderful this evening," she said, her tone carrying that distinctive inflection reserved for addressing children or the tragically afflicted. "I'm so pleased you could join us. I know these large gatherings can be overwhelming." The implication hung between us like expensive cologne, cloying and impossible to ignore. She assumed my presence here was an act of institutional charity, a demonstration of Sterling's commitment to diversity rather than recognition of my actual contributions to their bottom line. "Thank you, Sarah. It's quite the production." She laughed with the artificial brightness of wind chimes in a tornado. "Oh, you're wonderfully droll. Have you had the chance to meet our newest client, Victoria Ashworth? She's been asking about our technical infrastructure." Before I could respond, she had already pivoted away, her attention captured by a senior partner's gesture. This choreography had become familiar over 4 years, brief acknowledgement followed by swift dismissal, as if extended interaction might somehow contaminate her professional standing. I moved through the evening like a specter at his own wake, intercepting conversations that would have horrified the speakers had they realized I was listening. The assumption of my irrelevance, my cognitive limitations, had created a perfect surveillance blind spot in their awareness. "The diversity hire from IT," someone whispered near the champagne fountain. "Harmless enough, but you know how these inclusion mandates work." "At least he doesn't make waves," another voice responded. "Better than dealing with attitude problems on top of the other complications." The casual brutality of their dismissal might have wounded me once, but I had learned to metabolize their contempt into fuel for something far more sophisticated than anger. Each slight, each assumption, each moment of being overlooked had added another layer to the elaborate construction I had been building since my first day at Sterling Investment. The evening reached its inevitable climax when CEO Thomas Blackstone ascended the stage for his annual address. Blackstone embodied old money privilege masquerading as entrepreneurial genius. The type of man who had inherited his first 10 million and spent the subsequent decades convincing himself he had earned it through superior character rather than superior genetics. Tonight, we celebrate not merely our record-breaking performance, but the extraordinary family that made it possible, he began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who had never questioned his right to command attention. Every individual in this room embodies the excellence that defines sterling investment. The applause was thunderous but hollow, the sound of people celebrating their own reflections in Blackstone's rhetoric. I remained motionless, observing the performance with the clinical detachment of a behavioral scientist studying an unfamiliar species. Naturally, Blackstone continued, his smile expanding with corporate benevolence, we must also recognize those among us who inspire us through their courage in overcoming personal obstacles. Our commitment to diversity and inclusion transcends mere policy. It represents the very essence of our institutional character. His gaze located me across the crowded ballroom, and I felt the familiar weight of performative compassion settle over the gathering like a suffocating blanket. The applause that followed carried a different quality, softer, more cautious, tinged with the particular discomfort that came from being asked to acknowledge someone they would prefer to forget. I raised my wine glass in gracious acknowledgement, maintaining my role in their theater of corporate virtue while calculating the compound returns on 4 years of systematic underestimation. The evening was about to deliver a revelation that would obliterate their comfortable illusions forever. The mockery began with my stumble, a moment of genuine physical vulnerability that occurred when muscle spasms seized my left leg after standing too long on the marble floor. The wine glass escaped my grip and shattered against the polished stone with a sound like breaking promises, the crash echoing through the ballroom with supernatural clarity. The explosion of crystal commanded absolute silence. Every conversation ceased, every face turned toward me, and in that suspended moment I saw my entire professional existence reflected through their collective gaze, the awkward outsider, the corporate charity case, the living reminder of their own fortunate normalcy. "Oh dear," someone whispered with theatrical concern, their voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "Poor man." Those words ignited something contagious in the crowd, a shared moment of superiority disguised as sympathy. The laughter began as nervous titters, but evolved into something bolder as social permission spread through the gathering like wildfire. "Perhaps we should provide him with a sippy cup," someone suggested, and the laughter swelled with cruel enthusiasm. "Or maybe training wheels for those designer shoes," another voice added, and now the malice was naked and unashamed, feeding on itself with the momentum of mob psychology. I stood at the epicenter of their amusement, red wine spreading across white marble like spilled blood, and felt something fundamental crystallize within me. The strategic patience I had cultivated, the methodical invisibility I had worn like protective armor, all of it suddenly resolved into diamond-hard clarity of purpose. They believed this was my moment of ultimate humiliation. They had no comprehension that it was theirs. I retrieved my phone with deliberate precision, my fingers steady despite the involuntary tremor that occasionally affected my right hand. The movement captured their attention, and the laughter began to fade as curiosity replaced mockery. They watched with growing confusion as I composed a brief message, my expression remaining completely neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying easily across the now silent ballroom with the clarity that came from years of client presentations. "Thank you for this enlightening evening. It has been educational." My phone vibrated once in acknowledgement of the message. I slipped it back into my jacket pocket and began walking toward the ballroom's exit, my gait as measured and deliberate as ever. Behind me, confused murmurs began building like distant thunder, questions about my strange behavior, speculation about what had just transpired. The gradual return of nervous laughter as they attempted to recapture their lost moment of cruel entertainment. I paused at the ballroom's ornate entrance and turned to face them one final time. They were staring at me with the mixed expressions of people who had been enjoying a joke that had somehow stopped being funny without anyone explaining the punchline. "I should probably mention," I said, my voice maintaining the same quiet professionalism I had used in countless meetings where they had dismissed my technical recommendations, "that my transportation has arrived." Through the hotel's floor-to-ceiling windows, the midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom was already visible, gliding through the circular driveway with the silent majesty of a hunting shark. The vehicle was immaculate, its chrome gleaming under the hotel's dramatic lighting, its presence as understated and overwhelming as gravitational force itself. The laughter died like a candle in a hurricane. The luxury sedan came to rest directly before the hotel's main entrance, and the chauffeur, a consummate professional in an impeccably tailored uniform, emerged and moved with practiced efficiency to open the rear passenger door. He stood at attention with the patient professionalism that money commanded and respect demanded. I could feel the ballroom's atmosphere shifting like tectonic plates. Conversations died mid-syllable. The carefully constructed social hierarchies that had seemed so permanent moments before began cracking and reforming as people struggled to process the cognitive dissonance of what they were witnessing. "Whose car is that?" someone whispered, the words carrying with crystal clarity through the sudden stillness. I smiled for the first time all evening, an expression that felt revolutionary after years of careful neutrality. "That would be mine," I said, and began my walk toward a completely different life. The journey from the ballroom to the Rolls-Royce felt like crossing a bridge between parallel universes. Behind me, I could sense the gathering storm of confusion and frantic whispers. Ahead, Marcus, my chauffeur for the past 8 months, waited with the discretion that came from serving clients who valued privacy as much as luxury. "Good evening, Mr. Rodriguez," he said, his voice maintaining the neutral professionalism that marked truly superior service. "I trust the evening proceeded according to your expectations?" "Better than my wildest expectations, Marcus." "For better." I settled into the vehicle's interior, surrounded by leather that probably exceeded most people's annual salaries, and allowed myself a moment to savor the exquisite irony of the situation. Through the tinted windows, I could observe faces pressed against the hotel's glass facade, senior partners and junior analysts alike struggling to reconcile what they had just witnessed with their fundamental assumptions about reality. My phone began buzzing with the first wave of what would become a tsunami of messages. Sarah Martinez's number appeared on the screen, followed rapidly by others, people who hadn't initiated direct contact with me in months suddenly desperate for explanation, clarification, connection. I ignored every single one. The drive to my residence typically required 20 minutes through downtown traffic, but tonight I had instructed Marcus to take the extended route through the city's financial district. I needed time to process, to strategize, to fully appreciate the moment when 4 years of meticulous orchestration finally began yielding dividends. The truth possessed an elegant simplicity that explained why it had remained hidden for so long. People observed what they expected to observe, and I had invested years ensuring their expectations remained comfortably predictable. The disabled software analyst struggling to integrate, grateful for any opportunity to contribute in whatever marginal capacity the company would permit. This narrative had been so convenient for everyone involved that no one had bothered to examine its foundation. They never questioned why someone with my qualifications had accepted such a junior position. They never wondered why I seemed content with assignments that were clearly beneath my capabilities. They certainly never investigated the system vulnerabilities I had been methodically documenting. The patterns of algorithmic manipulation that revealed a sophisticated network of insider trading reaching into Sterling Investment's highest echelons. While they had been perfecting their performances of corporate inclusivity, I had been constructing a case that would atomize the entire organization. The Rolls-Royce was not theatrical prop or rental meant to create temporary impressions. It represented the tangible manifestation of 2 years of strategic investments, of converting my insider knowledge of their criminal activities into personal wealth through a series of precisely timed short positions and algorithmic trading strategies. Every crime they committed had generated another opportunity for someone with the patience to observe and the intelligence to capitalize. They had made it almost insultingly easy. My phone continued vibrating with escalating urgency. CEO Blackstone's personal number appeared on the screen, a man who had never once contacted me directly now desperate for communication. I allowed it to transfer to voicemail and smiled at the thought of his growing panic as he began understanding that his carefully controlled world was no longer under his control. The car arrived at my building, a converted industrial complex in the Arts District that I had purchased through a shell corporation 10 months earlier. The contrast between its minimalist facade and the luxury vehicle could not have been more perfect, another layer of misdirection that would keep them guessing about the true scope of what they were confronting. "Shall I remain available, sir?" Marcus asked as he opened my door. "No, that won't be necessary. Tomorrow promises to be extraordinarily busy, and I'll need you at full capacity." He nodded with the understanding that came from working for someone who planned maneuvers several moves in advance. As the Rolls-Royce disappeared into the urban night, I stood on the sidewalk and gazed up at the building that contained my authentic existence, the life I had been carefully constructing while they laughed at illusions. Inside, my residence bore no resemblance to the modest lifestyle my colleagues would have anticipated. For years of strategic investments, of converting their fraud into my fortune, had funded a space that reflected my actual preferences rather than their diminished expectations. Museum-quality artwork, custom-designed furniture, technology that most people could only fantasize about owning, all of it acquired through the careful transformation of profits extracted from their own criminal enterprise. But the residence's most impressive feature was the home office, a space that would have inspired envy in any Fortune 100 executive. Multiple high-resolution monitors displayed real-time financial data, algorithmic analysis, and the fruits of 4 years of methodical investigation. Every transaction, every falsified document, every instance of market manipulation and fund embezzlement, all of it carefully cataloged and cross-referenced with the precision that had once impressed my professors at Stanford. I poured myself a glass of 40-year-old single malt and settled into my ergonomic desk chair, surrounded by the evidence of their destruction. Tomorrow, the first domino would topple. Within a week, Sterling Investment would exist only in legal documents and criminal proceedings, its leadership dispersed among prison cells and professional disgrace. And I would emerge from the catastrophe as something they had never imagined possible, not their victim, but their architect of vengeance. The financial markets operate with the paradoxical nature of quantum mechanics. Information travels at light speed while its consequences unfold with geological patience. I had spent 4 years learning to navigate this contradiction, positioning myself where information would achieve maximum impact when it finally materialized. Tuesday morning arrived with the precision of atomic clocks and the force of seismic events. The initial story broke at 6:23 a.m. on Bloomberg's website. Federal investigation targets algorithmic trading irregularities at major investment firm. By 7:42, the Financial Times had published a more comprehensive piece. Anonymous whistleblower exposes systematic market manipulation at Sterling Investment. The documentation I had spent 4 years accumulating, every falsified algorithm, every manipulated trade execution, every instance of client funds being redirected to executive personal accounts, had been delivered to federal investigators with the surgical precision that only comes from intimate knowledge of the target's vulnerabilities. I sat in my home office command center, monitoring the cascade of market reactions while fielding increasingly desperate calls from former colleagues. The irony was absolutely delicious. They were contacting the person they had consistently marginalized, hoping he might possess some insight into the catastrophe consuming their professional universe. Sarah Martinez's voice fractured with desperation when I finally accepted her call. "David, thank God you answered. I need to ask you something critical, and I need complete honesty." "I'm always honest, Sarah. Sometimes people simply don't appreciate the truth they receive. The SEC is demanding trading algorithm records from the past 4 years. Some of the code they're examining. It's material that only someone with deep system access could have obtained." I allowed the silence to expand between us, giving her time to work through the implications of what she was suggesting. She possessed sufficient intelligence to assemble the pieces, but too much arrogance to accept the conclusion they formed. "You think I'm the whistleblower," I said finally. "I think you might have observed something, overheard something. You're always so quiet, so analytical. If someone was going to detect irregularities in our systems—" "You're absolutely correct," I said. "I did detect irregularities. I detected them systematically, comprehensively, and I documented them with the kind of methodical precision that you might expect from someone with my educational credentials." The sharp intake of breath on her end told me she was beginning to comprehend. "David, if you have information about potential violations, you need to report it through proper corporate channels. We can collaborate to it." "Sarah," I interrupted, my voice carrying the same quiet authority I had perfected in technical presentations, "I believe you're fundamentally misunderstanding the situation. I didn't discover evidence of wrongdoing. I compiled a comprehensive case documenting 4 years of systematic market manipulation, embezzlement, and securities violations. I delivered that case to federal investigators along with detailed algorithmic analysis and corroborating financial evidence." "That's not possible." "It's completely factual. I'm also, as of this morning, approximately $12 million wealthier than I was when I began documenting your criminal activities." The line went silent except for the sound of her breathing, sharp and erratic as she processed the magnitude of what I had just revealed. "This is insane," she whispered finally. "You're nobody. You're just disabled," I suggested. "Forgettable? Beneath serious consideration?" "Yes, Sarah, that was precisely the point. While you were all performing your elaborate theater of inclusion and corporate social responsibility, I was systematically dismantling your criminal enterprise from within. I could hear papers rustling in the background, the frantic clicking of computer keys as she attempted to access systems that had likely already been seized by federal authorities. "The SEC has frozen all company trading accounts," she said, her voice hollow with shock. "They've confiscated our servers, our client databases, everything." I would imagine so. I was extraordinarily thorough in my documentation. I wouldn't want federal investigators to overlook anything significant. "Why?" The word emerged as a broken whisper. "Why would you destroy us like this?" The question revealed everything about her worldview, about how she perceived me. Even now, confronted with the collapse of everything she had constructed, she couldn't conceive of me as anything other than a supporting character in her narrative. "Sarah," I said, my voice carrying the patience of a professor explaining elementary concepts to a struggling student, "you laughed at my disability. All of you laughed, treated me like a corporate charity case, rendered me invisible in my own professional environment. Did you genuinely believe there would be no consequences for that behavior? But we provided opportunities. We were inclusive, we supported. You provided access," I corrected. "Access to your systems, your confidential records, your private strategic discussions. You made me invisible, which meant I could observe everything without being observed. You marginalized me, which meant no one suspected me of possessing the intelligence or capability to threaten your organization." I paused, savoring the moment of complete revelation. "Your cruelty wasn't merely morally reprehensible, Sarah. It was strategically catastrophic. You transformed your greatest vulnerability into your most dangerous adversary, and you accomplished it with laughter and champagne toasts." The call terminated with the sound of her phone striking the floor, followed by what might have been sobbing or might have been the sound of someone's entire world ending in real time. I leaned back in my chair and watched the financial markets react to the morning's revelations. Sterling Investments' stock price was in absolute free fall. Trading halted 3 times as investors abandoned the sinking vessel. Partner firms were severing relationships, clients were demanding immediate account transfers, and somewhere in the downtown skyscraper that had been my professional prison for 4 years, panic was spreading like wildfire through the corporate hierarchy. The beauty of the situation lay in its perfect symmetry. They had made me invisible, and I had weaponized that invisibility to become the most dangerous person in their universe. They had dismissed my intelligence, and I had used that dismissal to outmaneuver them at every strategic turn. They had mocked my disability, and I had transformed their mockery into the soundtrack of their destruction. The collapse of Sterling Investment unfolded with the inexorable logic of classical tragedy. Each revelation built upon its predecessors, creating a cascade of consequences that no amount of expensive legal representation could contain or redirect. By Thursday, 4 senior partners had been arrested. By the following Tuesday, the SEC had expanded their investigation to encompass 3 other major investment firms that had been complicit in Sterling's market manipulation schemes. By the end of the month, Thomas Blackstone, the man who had offered me that condescending acknowledgement at the company gala, was facing 23 federal charges ranging from securities fraud to racketeering. I observed it all unfold from the comfort of my home office command center, managing calls from journalists, federal investigators, and former colleagues with equal measures of satisfaction and professional courtesy. The media had embraced the story with the enthusiasm reserved for scandals that combined corporate greed with unexpected narrative reversals, and I had evolved into something I had never imagined possible, a financial folk hero. "The Invisible Avenger," proclaimed one headline. "How dismissed employee toppled Wall Street titans," declared another. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 4 years of professional invisibility, I had become the most visible person in financial journalism. Interview requests flooded in from major networks, publishers offered 7-figure book deals, and speaking bureaus wanted to schedule appearances at conferences and universities worldwide. But perhaps the most satisfying moment occurred when Sarah Martinez appeared on financial television, attempting to explain how someone she had characterized as well-meaning but limited had orchestrated the destruction of her entire professional universe. "David Rodriguez was always very quiet," she told the interviewer, her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone reading from a script prepared by crisis management consultants. "We had no indication that he possessed this level of sophisticated analytical capability." The interviewer, a sharp-eyed journalist who had built her reputation on asking uncomfortable questions, pressed the point. "But Mr. Rodriguez has advanced degrees from Stanford and a documented history of exceptional performance in systems analysis. How could your organization be unaware of his capabilities?" Sarah's pause lasted long enough to become genuinely awkward television. We may have underestimated his professional potential. Or, the interviewer suggested with surgical precision, you may have allowed his disability to compromise your judgment regarding his intellectual capabilities. That soundbite would become required viewing in business school ethics courses for years to come, a perfect encapsulation of how prejudice could destroy not just individual careers but entire corporate empires. The personal satisfaction of witnessing my former colleague's public humiliation was amplified by the very tangible financial benefits of my 4-year operation. The strategic investments I had executed, the short positions I had established against Sterling and its partners, the precisely timed algorithmic trades. All of it had generated returns that transformed me from a comfortable middle-class professional into someone whose net worth was measured in multiple tens of millions. But money, I had discovered, was not the most valuable currency in the professional ecosystem. Information was more valuable than money, and reputation was more valuable than information. I now possessed all three in quantities that would have been inconceivable just weeks earlier. The job offers began materializing within days of my identity being revealed. Companies that would never have considered hiring someone with my disability were suddenly eager to demonstrate their commitment to recognizing talent regardless of physical limitations. The irony was so perfectly orchestrated it almost felt intentional. I declined every single offer. Instead, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I established my own company, Rodriguez Digital Forensics, specializing in detecting and preventing the kind of systematic fraud I had exposed at Sterling Investment. Within 8 months, I had secured contracts with 5 major investment firms, 3 government agencies, and a roster of private clients who valued my unique combination of technical expertise and insider knowledge of corporate criminal psychology. The disability that had once rendered me invisible in corporate boardrooms now made me unforgettable in client meetings. The limp that had inspired mockery at company galas became a reminder of the price of underestimating people based on superficial impressions. The involuntary movements that had marked me as different now served as a physical manifestation of the different perspective I brought to financial analysis and fraud detection. I was still disabled. I still walked with a pronounced limp, still managed muscle spasms, still required accommodations that others took for granted. But I was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed, no longer marginalized. I had become genuinely dangerous. 6 years later, I stood in the ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, the identical venue where Sterling Investment had hosted its final company gala. This time, I was the keynote speaker at the International Conference on Financial Ethics, receiving their Lifetime Achievement Award for transformative contributions to market integrity and fraud prevention. The choice of location was entirely deliberate. I had specifically requested this venue when the conference organizers offered to host the ceremony wherever I preferred. Some humiliations deserved to be transformed into victories, some moments of mockery into triumphs of vindication. Sarah Martinez was in the audience. She had managed to avoid federal prison through a plea agreement that obliterated her career but preserved her freedom. Her presence at the ceremony was part of court-mandated community service requirements, attending conferences on financial ethics and compliance. The judge had apparently possessed an appreciation for poetic justice. I spotted her in the 5th row, her face carefully neutral as she listened to the introduction that recounted my transformation from overlooked employee to industry icon. When our eyes met across the crowded ballroom, I offered her the same slight nod of acknowledgement she had given me years earlier, polite, perfunctory, utterly dismissive. The speech I delivered that evening was concise and strategically crafted. I spoke about the critical importance of recognizing talent in unexpected places, about the dangers of allowing prejudice to create blind spots in corporate governance, about the profound responsibility that accompanied insider knowledge of institutional wrongdoing. I did not mention the laughter that had catalyzed my crusade. I did not describe the years of meticulous planning that had preceded my revelation. I did not explain how profoundly satisfying it had been to watch their carefully constructed world crumble into legal proceedings and professional disgrace. Some stories are too personal for public consumption, too complex for neat moral conclusions. After the ceremony, as I waited for Marcus to retrieve the car, a young man approached me. He moved with the careful gait of someone managing his own physical challenges, and his handshake carried the firmness of someone who had learned not to apologize for occupying space in the world. "Mr. Rodriguez," he said, "I wanted to express my gratitude. I'm beginning my career next month at a major investment firm, and I wanted you to know that your story has given me confidence that I can achieve success without compromising my authentic identity." I studied him for a moment, recognizing in his expression the determination that had once sustained me through the darkest periods of my own professional journey. He was young, brilliant, and disabled in a world that would attempt to force him to choose between visibility and acceptance. The most effective revenge, I told him, is not merely success. It's success that compels them to fundamentally rewrite their assumptions about what's possible. He smiled, and I recognized in that expression the same fierce intelligence that had carried me through 4 years of careful planning and patient execution. As the Rolls-Royce glided up to the curb, I realized that the genuine victory was not the fortune I had accumulated or the company I had destroyed or the careers I had terminated. The real victory was standing in that ballroom, no longer invisible, no longer dismissed, no longer apologizing for existing in a world that had attempted to erase me. They had laughed at my disability at the company party. They had treated me as a diversity initiative, a corporate charity case, a living testament to their institutional magnanimity. They had made the fatal error of believing their own performance. I settled into the car's leather interior and provided Marcus with the address of my favorite restaurant. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to transform disadvantage into strategic advantage, new chances to prove that intelligence and determination could overcome any obstacle. But tonight, I would celebrate the completion of the longest game I had ever executed, a game that had begun with cruel laughter and concluded with perfect justice, that had started with professional humiliation and ended with complete vindication. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows as we drove through the financial district, past the empty shell of the building that had once housed sterling investment. The space was being converted into luxury residential condominiums, the corporate sins of the past transformed into someone else's American dream. I smiled and closed my eyes, listening to the silent purr of the engine and the distant sound of a world that would never again make the mistake of underestimating me. The game was finished. I had achieved total victory. And somewhere in the city, in boardrooms and conference rooms and company parties, other people who had been dismissed and marginalized and mocked were planning their own long games, their own perfect revenge. The revolution would be quiet, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Exactly as I had taught them.